sunflower seed. Jackie couldn't wait to get back home. She quickly ran all the way. Mother! Mother! Jackie called. Come quick to see what I have. Her mother rushed to the door and flung it open, and there stood her daughter holding the giant sunflower seed and no money. Mother worked very hard to hide her disappointment. The next day, Jackie and her mother planted that one giant sunflower seed. They watered it daily. The sun rose and set, and that one giant sunflower seed sprouted and began to grow and grow and grow. The neighbors came by to see it. The townsfolk came by to see it. And the city dwellers came by to see that one giant sunflower and sent out a photographer to take a picture of Jackie and the sunflower. Jackie's sunflower was even awarded a red ribbon at the county fair. The best thing to happen was that Jackie and her mother sold sunflower seeds to friends, neighbors, and anyone who wanted to grow one giant sunflower. This helped them to make a good living indeed. Now, as you can see, I've got some sunflowers. I couldn't bring the giant sunflower in because it was too big, but those are very lovely that Jacqueline grew. Part two is actually a separate story. It's a separate book, but it's all in this one book, and it's called Walter and Josephine. This is a true story. It is a story about my 83-year-old mother and no, I'm sorry, 85-year, let me give Mama's age out right, 85-year-old mother and 87-year-old brother. Walt and Josephine were siblings, brother and sister, during the Great Depression. They were part of a huge, loving family of 9 children. They lived in the deep South, way out in the country. Walt and Josephine's family were very poor. But this didn't stop them from having the time of their lives. They shared many fun-filled days of adventure. Now, being the eldest children gave them untold freedom. They were pretty much left to themselves. Their parents never quite caught on to what real danger their children were in. The most important thing about Walt and Josephine was their loving care for one another. Walt and Josephine hiked mile after mile, never once getting lost in the woods. They ran and jumped like deer, clearing fences 3 and 4 feet high. They would swing from thick green grapevines hanging from immensely tall trees. Oh, they had a grand old time. Now, one adventure finds Walt and Josephine fishing, but not with fishing poles made of cane or even woven nets. They were using their bare, tender hands to scoop up and toss fish after shiny, slimy fish onto the ditch bank from the clear, cool water below. The children carried their fish home for their mother, Lisbeth, to prepare for supper. Lisbeth gave thanks for the bounty. She also acknowledged that her children had been guided and protected that day. This was just the beginning for Walt and Josephine's adventures throughout their young lives. Now, when you think about this story, we as parents today would hardly let any of our children go out in the woods by themselves because we were afraid something would happen to them. But things in the olden times was quite different. The third part is called the wandering tree. I wonder about that because most trees that I've seen, they are rooted in the ground and they stay in one place. This story was inspired by my husband Tommy. Once upon a time, there was a beautiful white blossom covered dogwood tree that lived very deep in the woods. Every day he dreamed of traveling and seeing all the wonders of the world. He kept this secret to himself until he couldn't keep it anymore. He told the other trees, and they laughed and they laughed. They discouraged him, saying, "You are a dogwood tree that's rooted in the ground." But one tree was different. His name was Father Tree. He encouraged the young tree to keep on dreaming and showing his beauty. He told him that it would eventually pay off. Time passed by slowly. One day, the dogwood tree awoke very early to the frightening sounds of machines coming his way. They drew closer and closer. He could see trees falling to the ground this way and that way. He thought, surely I'll be next. However, at the last moment, the machine stopped. One of the men jumped down from his machine and came over to him. He had a trickle of tears flowing from his deep brown eyes. He had never, ever seen such a beautiful dogwood tree. He said that this tree was to be spared. The man's machine started digging into the hard, leaf-covered ground around the dogwood's roots. He felt that this must be the end. The very next moment, he felt himself being hugged and lifted from the ground high into the air. The man carefully wrapped his tender roots and placed him lovingly on the flat bed of a big truck. He was headed out of the woods to an unfamiliar place. During his trip, he saw rivers and mountains and towns and cities and people of all kinds. He felt a swelling in his heart. If this was the end of his life, then at least he had experienced the wondrous things that had been created. He finally arrived at a big, beautiful white mansion. He was carefully planted in a special garden near the mansion. He could peep into a large window that looked upon a man often sitting at his desk working. One day, the man came out for a break and stood next to the dogwood tree, admiring its beauty and sharing a bit of shade from its branches. The man and the tree had much in common, even though neither knew it. The man often had been discouraged throughout his life. He was told that he wouldn't make it, but look at him now. He was the leader of an entire nation. The tree and the man had doubts and fears that were overcome by achievements during life. They both had ridden along life's highway, fulfilling their dreams. They never, ever gave up and discovered that all things are possible. Now, who was that person in a big white mansion that had a special garden that was the leader of a whole nation? At the time this was written, our president was President Barack Obama, and that was his comparison to the wonder tree. Now, the very last part of the book was a surprise to me from my son. It's a supernatural story. Bets at Christmas. Mrs. Delphine Smithers was an 83-year-old who lived by herself, save for a cat. Her husband had passed 2 years prior, and her children have since grown up and left the nest. But come Christmas time, well, Mrs. Smithers gets a joy whenever her grandchildren pay a visit. She thought of the looks on their faces whenever she served them Christmas cookies and other pleasantries. This Christmas, she made some sweet and salty bark and kept it on the kitchen table. She found herself sitting down in her favorite chair, knitting a scarf, when there came a sharp knock on the door. She jumped a bit, not expecting any visitors now. "Can we come in?" Smithers tentatively laid the scarf on the arm of the sofa and gripped the chair. Her frail bones popped and shifted. Getting up from the chair, Smithers collected her walking stick and trudged rigidly towards the front door. Another sharp knock rung out, that time more agitated than previously. "I'm coming! Hold on!" Smithers yelled. She grasped the doorknob and turned it counterclockwise. The door creaked open. On the other end of the door were two children, a boy and a girl. The boy appeared older, presumably around 13. He wore a denim hoodie and gray pants. He was holding the hand of an 8-year-old girl who was wearing a blue dress with white lace. For whatever reason, the children had their heads bowed, looking at their feet. The boy repeated his question. "Can we come in?" Smithers scratched her head. It was 10 p.m. Why would these children be at her house at that time of night? Somehow, the boy must have realized what she was thinking. "We need to borrow your phone. My cell phone battery's dead." Now, Smithers thought more about the suddenness of having these unexpected guests, but they were children regardless. At the very least, she could grant them this one request. She nodded her head, gesturing the two children in. Smithers directed them into the living room, where her cat awakens from the ruckus. When it set its eyes on the two mysterious children, the cat arched its back and hissed. Smithers walked over to silence her cat. "Lex, these are our guests. Behave yourself." The cat meowed in defeat before running out of the living room and into the kitchen. The two children sat on the sofa and their eyes were still hidden. Smithers went into the kitchen and pulled out the plate of sweet and salty bark. She returned to the living room and bent down to the children's eye levels. "Care for some sweets?" The boy looked up. There was good reason as to why he was shielding his eyes. They were devoid of color or pupils, nothing more than pitch black nothingness. Whatever he was, he assuredly was not of the earthly realm. The girl looked up as well. Her eyes matched the cold blackness of the older boy. And yet, most bizarre, Smithers smiled at the children despite the hollow sockets that they call eyes. The children were speechless at first. They shared a puzzled glare. The girl waved her hand in front of Smithers' face, but Smithers didn't follow the path of it and leaned in closer, realizing that Smithers's eyes were glazed over in a thin sheet of blue. She was blind. Smithers suddenly frowned. Oh, I'm sorry. You don't care for them? Thank you, the boy said. He took a piece of the sweet and salty bark and broke it in his hand before passing the girl a piece. Their heavy teeth ground down on the sweets. Honest aside, the two children couldn't help but bask in the sweetness and saltiness of the snack. They indulged themselves in more of the sweets before getting up. They looked at the decorations with curiosity. On top of the fireplace, on a stand, was a small replica of the nativity scene. From her mental notes, she figured that the two children had stopped at the fireplace. Isn't it such a lovely display? She asked. Do you know the story of Christmas? We know about your Jesus, the boy responded. Our ancestors spoke a lot about him. Confused by his statement, Smithers nevertheless allowed the two children to further marvel at the Christmas decorations. The girl rustled the Christmas tree, causing the ornaments to fall on the ground. She ceased when she sensed Smithers getting upset. The two children played with the nutcrackers and listened to Christmas songs. The hours edged by slowly until a sudden electrical surge generated through the house. The two children looked at each other and back at Smithers. We have to go now. Our parents are here. Bright light shone through the windows. Outside was a spherical, smooth craft standing on 3 legs. A large, skinny-looking creature exited the craft and stood there at the door. The two children collected the plate of sweet and salty bark and exited through the front door. There came a sound of a large whistle, as if there were 1,000 steam engines situated outside. Within a flash, the craft was gone. Smithers called out for the two children, only to be met by a great silence. She closed the door and returned to her knitting.
Miss Becky, do you care to maybe talk a bit about the dogwood tree and how it might compare to us, whether we're a little child or an older child or a teenager or an adult? Can you kind of give us some comparisons?
I can. Each and every one of us, we are different, we are special, and we have a purpose. Just like the dogwood always kind of knew that he was a little different, and maybe he didn't fit in so well in that particular forest with the other trees. But in his heart, he knew that he was going to make it. And sometimes we don't exactly fit in everywhere we go, but if we are diligent and we have patience and we try, then we too can achieve great things. You don't always have to be successful in the beginning of a life story. You can grow into greatness. Is that kind of answer? And
Yes.
the man and the tree didn't even know that they had anything in common at all. because they're different species.
And there's a phrase that has floated around for years called, or it says, bloom where you are planted.
Wonderful.
So tell us how maybe for the dogwood, how it was blooming where it was planted, even though it was a new place, a different place. What do you think about that?
I do believe that it probably, now it was beautiful in the forest because the man stopped and looked at it. In fact, that's what saved its life, will you? And that he shed a tear, but he still hadn't found his little special place. And when he was moved to the new garden outside the big white mansion, then he felt that he had reached his purpose and he can now bloom and illuminate for all to see. And that's kind of how we are. We too can bloom and illuminate. As I said, it's not all, we're not going to be blooming all the time, but there'll come a point in your life when you too will begin to shine and others will see that light inside of you, just like they saw the blossoms of the dogwood tree.
Do you, boys and girls, have any questions maybe for